Hello, and welcome once more to Literary as Feck. And it's me, Clive Davis, and my trusty steed down there.
Nick.
And we got a guest, someone we haven't had on for a little while, so it's a pleasure to welcome back. Introduce yourself, sir.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Geno Cuddy.
All right, Gino, how's it
Wait,
going?
do we have any ladies that watch the show?
You did say, ladies and gentlemen.
I know. I'm just wondering. I'm excited at the idea that we might have because I can't even get my wife to watch me. So let's hope. Let's hope.
So I don't think we do, by the way.
No.
But
Okay.
it's good to be inclusive.
True. Thanks, Gino.
Yeah, so we haven't had Gino on for a little while, so it's good to have him back. And so it's his recommendation this time out. So tell us what we're going to be talking about, Gino, and why did you select this particular? So we should also mention it's our first. I don't think we've done an audiobook before.
No,
it's the first time we've done an audiobook, so that's a little different as well. So yeah, take it away, Gino. What's going on today?
Well, tonight, everybody, I brought this book, this novel. First, let me preface this by saying that I rarely ever read novels. I'm more of a nonfiction guy. But every so often, there's a novel that comes along that I really like. And honestly, I'm also a fan of the author. I've been a fan of the author ever since I was a little kid, and I grew up watching and listening to his radio show, and really loved the banter and the camaraderie that he had his uh, with his comrades on the radio program. And the book that I recommended to Clive and Nick is God's Other Son, a novel by Don Imus, as you'll see an illustration of the author on the back cover. And the audiobook version, which I transferred from my own cassettes, is really a great listen, because it's almost like you're listening to a 2 hour long version of an Imus in the Morning radio show, except, with the exception of, they're not talking to any sort of political guests. That's all the jokes and banter of the program, without any of the political discussion, which I do have to say I enjoyed as well. I think Imus was a great interviewer, and I don't think he gets enough credit for his work as an interviewer. I mean, he was a great humorist, but I don't think he gets enough credit for his role as an interviewer. I mean, let's actually discuss how I mean, his program originally started out. He was a classic rock, rock shock jock DJ, and that eventually morphed into doing like morning zoo type stuff, and Billy Solhargis, the main character of God's Other Son, being a character that he had devised as a sort of a parody of a lot of those televangelists and let's just say crooked evangelists that we were basically inundated with in the 70s and 80s. So he created that character in the 70s and performed that character, I think, up until the 90s, I'd like to say. And that's when his program sort of, I would say, shifted focus from being an all jokes and all classic rock to being more of a talk radio show where he, interviewed like, because, people got to remember, I mean, while a controversial figure, he had some of the biggest, names in politics on his program. Like he would have Tim Russert from NBC News on. He would have senators like here in Connecticut. He would have like Senator Joe Lieberman on. He would have all these big political names on his program, and sensational interviewer. But yet, on the other side of that was the antics of him, his I guess you would say his almost father figure on the program, being Charles McCord, and his rather mischievous right-hand man being sadly now the late Bernard McGurk. And the three of them created magic on the radio, along with comedians like Rob Bartlett and voiceover artist Larry Kinney, who also contributed to the audio book version of God's Other Son. And Imus in the Morning is a very special radio program to me. I know people are probably going to bring up the whole nappy-headed hoe incident that took hold in 2006, 2007, but Imus was a lot more than that. If you really watch, or listen to his radio shows, I mean, when it was time for laughs and giggles, it was time for laughs and giggles. But when it came to the serious political talk, it was serious, and he was such a sensational interviewer. I mean, I'm not going to say he was like a Edward R. Murrow or anything, but he was a really good interviewer for the type of guy that he was and the type of show that he did. I think he was a sensational, interviewer and just a sensational radio program all the way around. I still listen to like clips from Imus in the Morning occasionally, and I still get the occasional chuckle, and still have fond memories of watching the program when it was simulcast on MSNBC back in the day with my mom. Such great memories of, and that's why I wear this. That's why I had my own talk show, Geno in the Evening, for a while, is because I was so inspired by Imus that I decided to branch out and do my own show and wear this hat in tribute. Now,
sorry.
how familiar are either one of you with Imus in the Morning and Don Imus?
Well, that's what I was going to say, actually. This is how unfamiliar I am. I kind of need you to let me know, because I don't. I'm assuming, is this Don Imus's voice? Is that him doing the majority of the audiobook?
Yeah, it's him. It's Larry Kenney. It's Rob Bartlett. And there's also a female whose name is escaping me right now. But yeah, Imus is the main voice in these recordings.
And is that him? Is that his natural accent, or is it an affected one for doing the Reverend Billy character? Is that how he would normally have sounded? Is that his accent?
I guess he's affecting some sort of a Southern accent for this, but that's pretty much his voice.
Because he was originally from California, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I
spent some time in Arizona as well. I was reading his or not IMDb. I was reading his Wikipedia entry, and apparently he did spend some time in Arizona too. So I mean, California, Arizona, certainly it is south in a way. So I mean, there's a
so that's how I was with Don Imus. I needed that confirmed. How about you, Nick? Were you familiar with his stuff?
No, unfortunately, as just brought up, I primarily know him because of what happened in 2007. I think like we didn't really get the shock jocks in Canada. We didn't really get Howard Stern. We didn't really get Don Imus or any of those other type of people. Like I don't know. Like Canadian TV and Canadian radio is it's locked down. There's all these weird laws in Canada around like Canadian content and stuff. That means it's actually quite hard, particularly for radio content, to kind of breach our borders. And also Canadians are a little bit more wishy-washy. I don't know if that. Sorry, Canada, but there's like a tendency to like avoid controversy and things like that. So the whole idea of a kind of a shock jock, I think, at least back then, things have probably changed now. But so yeah, no, really, whatever I knew about him was that explosion in the media back then in whatever that was, 2007, over the basketball thing. So this was all kind of new to me too. I didn't realize he had a much longer history as a broadcaster. I didn't realize he'd written a book. I didn't realize he'd done some of the charitable stuff he's done. So like I primarily, for so these things, these flashpoints, you're like, okay, you get an image of somebody from a moment in time, and you're like, okay, that's who that person is. And then you always have to remind yourself, you should probably dig a little deeper. And there's usually a whole human being behind something like that, I guess.
So you've got the book there as well, right? Not just the audiobook.
Yes, I have the book in print as well. Right. And I do have the audiobook just off screen here on 2 cassette tapes, Simon & Schuster Audio. Thank goodness for them. And they came through because apparently you guys were, at least you, Clive, you were having a hard time finding a copy of this for cheap, and
yes,
to get it shipped to to Japan, excuse me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think, Nick, likewise, you were having some difficulty obtaining a copy.
quite hard to come by. Although weirdly enough, I did discover that I just found it today as I was looking up the book, that it has been uploaded to one of those, like, we've used them once or twice in the past for this show when we wanted to read something that's very out of print or hard to find, that there are certain websites where you can kind of, the entire book has been uploaded and you can flip through it page by page. And this is a book that I think, because it's out of print, it's a book that you can now find online in one of those, like,
Oh, okay. The reason I wanted to ask as well is because the audiobook we listened to, which you kindly provided, ran about 100 minutes, and then I was looking at the page count of the book.
it's 320 pages.
Yeah, I'm assuming the audiobook is somewhat abridged from the novel. Is that right?
Yeah.
Right. And the other thing I was wondering as well, so I couldn't figure out. So how did you record the audiobook? Did you play it out in the room, and then, because there's laughter in the background, and I wasn't sure if it's on the original cassette.
Oh, it is on the original cassette. How I actually recorded this was, and I'm sort of upset with this little piece of equipment, because unfortunately there are some hiccups throughout the recording that I provided for you, and I apologize for that. That was beyond my control and everything. How I did it was I used this boom box that I have called an Ion Street Rocker, basically you can put a cassette in it and record the contents of the cassette to a USB flash drive, and then I put the USB flash drive in here, and I just put it all together in the end. So that's basically how I recorded it for you guys.
Because I wasn't sure, because the choice to have a kind of audience is an odd, like, because it's kind of intermittent, and it's not throughout. And unlike, let's say, for instance, you're watching television and they have like a sitcom with canned laughter or something, which is, consistently on every joke there's some canned laughter. In this case, it's not all the time. It just kind of creeps in every now and again. And I was curious. I'm wondering, are they replicating, maybe, for instance, because I didn't know Don Imus outside of this. Are they maybe trying to replicate that atmosphere of like a talk show radio thing where you have people in the studio kind of responding? Is that what they're going for, do you think? Is that the idea behind having this kind of running laughter in the background?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think fans of Imus's or Imus in the Morning would have expected any less, really. I mean, I certainly didn't expect any less when I bought that originally back in the day, and I listened to it. Hilariously enough, I actually used to listen to that as I was going to bed. That would be my going to bed, tape, and I would listen to that as I was going to bed. It was just sensational because, it's like you're in a dark room, you're all alone, and it feels like, there are people there in the room with you, and just having a grand old time. And that's how I really fell in love with the story and fell in love with this book, and I had to have the print version of it as well. So I do like that casual, laid back, camaraderie that there is with the narrators of the story.
Right.
So maybe Geno, you can kind of just like give the audience a bit of an overall picture of what this is, like, what's the story like.
Well, God's Other Son is basically, and I think it's actually the final chapter in this particular area of Don Imus's career. This is sort of, I think, and I could be wrong on this, but I think that this is like his, farewell letter to the Billy Hargis character, because I don't think that there was anything else Billy Hargis after this book was written, and basically what this book is about is it's sort of a satirical novel about this guy by the name of Billy Hargis who was born to an unwed mother, and was dropped on the doorstep of this sleazy diner, and basically grew up with his disfigured uncle and his rather flirtatious aunt,
Mhm.
and
That was shocking to me. The ages involved in that early part. I was like, ooh, that's quite,
yeah.
okay. Mm.
And basically, Billy sort of rises through the ranks, and he's a very religious guy, and he meets Boone Moses, who's a preacher, and he himself becomes an evangelist and puts on these massive shows and everything else, these explosive shows in like Shea Stadium and Madison Square Garden and whatnot. And it's all foretold as if this is in flashback, because it's like here's the Billy Hargis tapes. It's like this is all being told as if he's like one of the most important figures of the 21st century. And he is it's all basically like they have this panel of people who have been chosen to release these tapes, and it's basically these tapes that Billy Hargis recorded while on a cross, in a windstorm with his friend Tyrone Jefferson. And so that's basically what the book's about. It's about this guy who becomes a evangelist, and you get to hear about the seedy underbelly of that whole game.
Mm-hmm. It's funny. I couldn't help but picture, because, like, especially when he was in the younger part, and I realized too, that's because when I've seen pictures of the younger Don Imus, he kind of has a bit of a mop. Do you know who Marjo Gortner is?
Oh yes, yes.
Yeah, a part of me, I couldn't help but like see Marjo in the young Billy, and that was when I was reading.
That makes a lot of sense, right? Because he was a kind of whistleblower,
Yeah,
a child televangelist, right?
exactly. Who then, kind of blew the lid off
exploitation movie star.
Then showed up in he's in one of is he in one of Luigi Cozzi's?
He's in all sorts of things.
Yeah, he's in Star Crash.
He's in Star Crash. Yes,
there we go.
Yes, that's what I most
better than Star Wars.
I know, according to you, Clive,
is better than all Star Wars. Because Star Wars doesn't have Joe Spinell in a cape.
That is true. Star Wars does not have that.
Nor does it have Caroline Munro in that outfit.
Exactly. That is also true. That is also true. But yeah, I definitely saw Marjo in my mind's eye in those early segments.
But this was originally published in 1981, right? And then to greater acclaim apparently in 94. I'm not quite sure when the audiobook came along, but so I'm wondering if this was obviously Don Imus seems to have become more popular in the interim as well, so that probably helped sales. But also I'm wondering, so 81 is maybe pre kind of a lot of television is more localized, right, as opposed to being it's all interconnected and syndicated to the extent that it became in the 80s and 90s and pre-public access and stuff like that. So I'm wondering if the whole televangelist thing was kind of relegated to maybe certain pockets of the country at the time, so maybe not enough people were familiar with it, maybe, and then when it came out in 94, people were a little bit more, because if you weren't in an area an area where these things flourished, you might not necessarily have got the joke, as it were.
Right.
Also, a lot of the scandals I feel like came later on than like a lot of those Jerry Falwells and the kind of that had those kind of like moments of weakness or whatever, that so in a way he was kind of ahead of the game in that way and kind of exposing this. But then I think people were probably more jaded about that stuff. 81 is pretty early in when does Reagan is 80, right?
Yeah.
I mean, so people are still very much Good Morning America, I think, at that point. And maybe people are but by the 90s people are a bit more jaded.
Well, I'm trying to kind of place it in the time it came out, because I have to admit I didn't particularly get on with this very well. I didn't find it very funny, but I was trying to figure out why it wasn't clicking with me, and I'm wondering if I'm wondering if maybe it's dated a little bit. Like I'm thinking maybe the character would have been a lot more outrageous in 81, and there was a certain element of the outrage mixed in with the comedy that kind of made it funnier, if you see what I mean. Whereas it was, for instance, if this was a new recording, if this was a brand new thing, you would accuse it for going after soft targets, right? Where it wouldn't have been when it was new, right? So, I mean, how do you both feel in terms of like, well, obviously, Gino, you get on with it. How about you, Nick? Did you like it, or did you find it funny? And then, if so or not, like, what do we think about? Do we think this is dated, or do you think it's actually more relevant now than when it was new, or less, or?
Okay, so I think it's funny. What I wondered was, I guess, and maybe I'll find out at some later point if I do get a paper copy, was because for me one of the enjoyable things was just Don Imus's voice. Like, he's clearly somebody who, like, he's a man who can read a book well, right? Like, it's dramatically done. So as an audiobook, I enjoyed the fact that it was
Well, you can tell he's invested in the character, and that it's a creation of his, and I'm assuming, is this a character, we didn't mention this maybe, is it a character that grew organically out of skits on the radio show? Is that how it started?
Yeah, I think so, yes.
Okay.
But it's funny because it's just recent, and I wonder if this is just something that you just generally don't get along very well with, Clive, because we recently read a book, the Rosenberg book that we read. What was that called again? The Public Burning?
Public Burning, yeah.
And what you didn't like about that was those extended passages of kind of like almost evangelical rhetoric, right?
Like a folksy kind of,
Yeah.
gosh darn it,
thing that like for some reason, like, and I, that didn't bother me as much as it bothered you in that book. Like, I kind of entered into the spirit of the kind of that Uncle Sam character and just kind of ran with it. But I think you had a harder time with doing that. And I do see that there's a little bit of this overlap in this book in that way, because it's got some of that kind of like folksy.
What I mean is, I do like some stuff in that vein, but the tone has to be kind of just right. And again, that's just on me. That's not no one else's problem.
Right, that's a take
myself,
issue.
and I can't even actually really pinpoint it or explain why one thing irks me and then another thing doesn't. But yeah, you're right. There was, I mean, it wasn't actively annoying so much, but yes, it was edging a little bit towards. And I understand a lot. I understand a lot of the characters in the book are exactly as they are. They're supposed to be, you know,
larger than life.
Well, and more than that, they're also supposed to be despicable in a way,
right?
But in a way which is kind of
endearing.
Yeah.
Right.
So I caught that. I caught the tone of it, and yes, but yeah, comedy is so subjective, right? And it's very difficult to say why something is funny for one person isn't for another. And sometimes it's a matter of getting something as well. Like, I think there's different layers of getting. Like, sometimes I remember I'd see American TV sitcoms, for instance, on television in the UK when I was growing up. And sometimes you'd understand the joke and it was funny and you'd laugh. Other times you'd understand what the joke was, but you didn't think it was funny, you didn't laugh. But every now and again, there'd be like something and the audience would crack up, and I don't even understand where the joke is. So there's different layers. There's getting something as in I understand it, but I don't think it's funny. But then there's other things which are just, I don't even understand where the joke is there.
Because of the cultural gap.
Yeah,
right?
or sometimes in terms of things like that, because it's a long running gag, maybe it's more character based. So it's like, oh, here we go. We know that when he or she says something in that tone, it means troubles,
Right. This is like that weird thing that this is true. I mean, what didn't affect me so much because I'd moved to Canada already when all of the SNL movies started to come out. But I had relatives back home in Ireland who would say to me, like, you know, when Wayne's World came out, and they'd be like, you know, have you seen Wayne's World? And I was like, well, yeah, those sketches have been running for 3 years or whatever on SNL. Like, that movie comes out of this thing, and they would have no context. They would have no
Yes.
idea. And then sometimes, like, I don't know, A Night at the Roxbury would come out, and they'd be just like, I don't understand why that's funny. And I'd be like, well, the sketch wasn't terribly funny either, actually. You know, so, but yeah, there are sometimes things that, yeah, you're right,
Yeah.
require a bit of knowledge.
So, but in this case, I didn't. It wasn't a not getting. I think most of this didn't fly over my head. I think I kind of understood why. I think it was just a matter of not finding it funny, and also the other thing as well, a little bit was, I think it might have something to do with your. So obviously these characters are towards the further end of the kind of evangelical rip-off kind of spectrum, right? They're all just kind of ripping off the faithful for cash and stuff like that, right? And now,
Although our main character does develop a proper, like, messiah complex. Like, he does seem to genuinely believe on some level that
yeah, but I
he's
don't know if that's
a son of God.
better or worse in a way.
Okay.
You know, but what I mean is, it's interesting as well, because I think all three of us are coming from slightly different. So, for instance, Nick's a lapsed Catholic, right? Is that fair to say?
Yes.
Right? Geno is a believer, yeah? And I'm an atheist, right? So I suppose it depends on your relationship with that as well. So, for instance, for me, I understand that these characters are, like I said, the far end of the spectrum. They don't represent, you know, all faithful everywhere. But for someone who's an atheist, it's, yes, you understand the distinction and you can laugh at these characters, but in my mind, it's kind of difficult. It's kind of part of the same continuum in a way. So it's difficult for me to separate, like, the more predatory types from other types of organized religion. And obviously there is a distinction, but it's more of a grading for me rather than. So I think that also affects my reaction to it, if you see what I mean, because it's, as a non-believer, it's all fantasy, if you see what I mean. So that also kind of tempers your reaction to it. I don't know if you see what I mean.
Yeah, because basically, you know, the line's blurred for you.
Yes.
As a non-believer, you can't necessarily tell when the genuosity, if that's even a word,
Is now.
ends and where the treachery, you know, begins.
Right. Yeah.
It's funny for me, you know, obviously, I mean, I'm a lapsed Catholic, partly because my church that I was born into has done some pretty awful things in the world, right? So, you know, there was that. As I grew up, I kind of became more aware of the Spanish Inquisition, and then the part that the church has played in my own country in Ireland, you know, in the Magdalen laundries and in, you know, the residential schools here in Canada. But that said, you know, so have you ever been to a faith healing, Clive?
No.
Okay, because it is. I went twice. I went twice to 2 times. I went to. One was when I was in my early 20s, and that was when I was very much in my most irreligious phase, and I was like, I want to go see, like, this at its worst, right? So I went to see a guy. I won't say his name, but he's quite famous in Canada, and I think maybe in some of the northwest of the US as well. And we went in there, and immediately two, like, big burly guys in, like, sharp suits clocked us. Like, right away they were like, they're here for the wrong reasons. I mean, you know, I guess we were not flying under the radar at all, and they sat right next to us to make sure that we weren't planning to cause trouble. I just wanted to see how it plays out, and, you know, it was really revolting. Like, there was a lot of old people who were in pain and you know, whatever else, and this guy was absolutely, you know, stealing from them, you know, and offering, you know, like, pretty weak. From what I could see, you know, they weren't getting much back for their money, right? And then I went to see Jake the Snake Roberts when Jake the Snake did his tour in I can't remember when this was, but it was during when they made the Beyond the Mat documentary. was shortly after he had just finished his tour, and I had gone to see him on that tour. Clive, you know who Jake the Snake is, I assume.
Well, I'm assuming there's a reason you brought him up, other than I know of him as a wrestler, but I'm assuming
Yes.
something else happened.
Yes.
Did he become an evangelist?
He did, yes.
Okay.
He did a whole thing where he kind of sold himself as a born again Christian, and that he had, and that the snake, he worked the snake into it as a symbol of the serpent in the Old Testament and stuff, and I didn't know what to make. I just went because somebody told me, like, Jake the Snake Roberts is down at the Baptist church, and I was like, well, I'm going to go see that because it's Jake the Snake Roberts that I grew up watching. The first broadcast of the WWF when it first came to Ireland. But I knew that something was wrong. Even like just sitting there, I was like, he doesn't believe this. Like, you could just, he was nothing sincere about him. And then later on, it turns out in that documentary, he talks openly about it. Yeah, I was basically smoking crack behind the curtains and stuff. Like, he was completely a mess. So there's that. But then there's, my mom who is also in a way a fallen away Catholic, but she's not a Christian. She joined the Baptist church here, right? Her next door neighbor, or the lady across the road, is a Baptist, and so my mom joined that church. And whatever I think, it gives my mom a lot of comfort. I've gone to the church with her once or twice because she's asked me to, and I've gone, and she knows that I'm not totally comfortable with it. In that Baptist is even more like Catholic is kind of like boring in a way. There's some smoke and mirrors and stuff, but like there's no big show. But when I went to the church with my mom, there was an actual like huge hot tub on the stage where people are getting like baptized. Adults are being baptized fully clothed and stuff. And I was like, wow, this is for me quite out there.
Yeah. That's my mom was baptized that way.
Okay, yeah. I mean, I'd never seen that before because in Ireland, basically, you're baptized. I don't know what they do for adults, actually. I don't even know if it's easy to join the Catholic Church as an adult, but certainly as a kid, you're baptized, in the whatever the thing is called. But yeah, so
it's fun. You just get you just get a drop of water on your forehead. I think.
That's what we do in my church now. Yeah,
okay.
That's how I was baptized.
Right, which makes more sense to me. The hot tub thing seems quite intense.
But obviously, baptism isn't just relegated to Baptists either, right? Because Methodist, I was.
Well, no, Catholics are baptized too. If you're a Christian, like the others, you go through some baptism.
Actually, so we should probably define just so we know what we're talking about. So, which denomination are you, Geno? I don't think I've actually asked you about that before.
Well, I consider myself a Christian. I don't, say I belong to any sort of denomination. I mean, my church is multi-denominational. We're United Church of Christ, and we're congregational church. I don't know if that helps at all, but we're a congregation of multiple denominations and multiple beliefs and everything. Because we believe that, God is still speaking, God is still hearing. Your interpretation of who God or Jesus is up to your interpretation. That's why, when we, say the Lord's Prayer, we say our Creator who art in heaven instead of our Father or our Mother, because that's, it's all up to you and how you think of it. Some people think God is female. So me personally, I think God is male. And then there's some who think that God's non-binary. Our church is open and affirming that way, and that we accept people from all walks of life. I mean, so that's basically what my church is like. I mean, I wish more people would, when they poke fun at religion, especially Christianity, and Christianity seems to be the world's biggest punching bag, unfortunately. I wish that they would, come to one of our worship services and see, just how different, it is from what the rest of the pack is doing. And sadly enough, how sort of segregated and divisive the other denominations could be. Because we're open and affirming and we love and welcome everybody.
I'm bringing it back to the book then as well then. So that's kind of interesting. So yeah, clearly the character of Reverend Billy and all of his cohorts in this book are, every bit as objectionable to any one of us, right?
Regardless of what you're,
yeah.
And that's what I was going to say. So I do, you know, I can see how if you're absolutely 100% dyed in the wool atheist, that it just seems like a spectrum or whatever of like, you know,
yeah,
the
like
same
I can
stuff,
appreciate
but
the
extremes, and you know,
but
I will say,
yeah,
for me, like seeing what you know, how much charitable work my mom's church is involved in terms of like getting food into the hands of children who are hungry on the island, you know, or when I see, I mean, I have a weird relationship with Quakerism, right? Because Jennifer taught at a Quaker school for 10 years in Japan. Fernando Gakuen, our friend school, was a Quaker school, right? So
the Quakers are big here.
Yeah, and you know, Quakers are another, like they're very much they're a Christian religion, but they're also a very progressive, like very anti-war, very it's more again about a personal relationship with God.
Yeah,
more
Methodism as well is somewhat similar.
That's basically kind of like what our church is. You know, we're I mean, largely we're anti-war. I mean, we don't like conflict. You know, we don't like, you know, not violence and things like that. You know, we're very much like that. But you know, we just try to, you know, show everybody love regardless of what background you're from. I mean, you know, I actually have, you know, one of my church's, you know, programs, you know, here, and let me see if I could find what we say. Well, I'm not finding it in here, unfortunately.
I
But
think
we don't segregate against people at all.
I think we should add an addendum to that, though. Just, you know, we should say all that is true, apart from people who don't think Star Crash is better than Star Wars. Those people
yes.
are just not.
They should be kept away from everyone else.
Yes, because they're wrong.
Okay.
Unfortunately, that's quite a lot of people.
Probably that's most people, actually. There's probably a very small group of us.
Most people are wrong. I'm starting the Church of Star Crash.
Star Crash.
All
right.
I'm going to wear a cape just like Joe and everything.
The Gospel of.
We are straying somewhat. So, anyway, I didn't particularly find this book. Did you find the book? Because we'll get to, because I want to go back to Geno and talk more, because I wanted his perspective, because clearly he gets on with the book a lot more. So I kind of want to hear why. But first, did you find it funny, Nick? Were you laughing at this? Or?
Well, in portions, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I liked all of the dick stuff, as I always do. Anybody smacking their dick with bricks or in windows that's comedy for me. As I said, I enjoyed the delivery. I enjoyed the voices. I mean, I will say the one thing that for me was a bit uncomfortable was what Don gets in trouble for later on, right? There's definitely some very broad racially based stuff here that I was like, you know, for me is always a bit hard to take.
I didn't find that too problematic, because it seemed to me to come from the characters more than like it seemed.
Sure. Yeah. No, I'm not saying that it was a yes, that it's, you know, but it's just funny because like there's one term that's used that's literally the term that got him in so much trouble, you know, whatever it was, 20 years later or 30 years later, right? And so that's the one thing that was a bit of a sour note for me.
But it is put in the mouths of people who would use that word, right? So
yeah, for sure. Yeah. But still,
I don't think I personally didn't find it gratuitous. Let's put it that way.
I'm with Clive. I mean, you know, you have to realize that. I mean, yes, Don Imus did get in trouble for the whole, you know, Rutgers, you know, thing. I understand that, but you know, Charles McCord has said and gone on record as saying Don Imus is not a racist. I believe that he isn't a racist either. You know, I mean, he has said things and whatever, and you know, I mean, the thing with Don Imus is that they were, and the crew of Imus in the Morning is they were equal opportunity offenders. They offended everybody. I mean, everybody was the butt of the joke. If you really listen to their program day in and day out, instead of just pinpointing to the one thing that got him into trouble, you know, I mean, Imus was the butt of the joke all the time. People making fun of the fact that he married an extremely younger woman than he was. You know, they made jokes about, oh, he must have picked her up on the playground in elementary school and stuff like that. I mean, you know, just classic locker room humor that, you know, was perpetuated throughout the radio program. And and so but regardless of all of that, I think what's the important thing to remember here is that this book takes place in like the 30s and up until like the 50s and 60s, basically the South. And so this is basically how people of that time period, thought about, people of color. I mean, I'm not saying I endorse it. I don't endorse it, but by all means. But this is how people of that generation in that particular geographical area thought of people of color.
Right.
So
Yeah.
it's
Sure, sure. I suppose for me, like, and Clive always loves it when I bring up the fact that I have family who are, have African descent.
Yes.
I'm
Pale
thinking this
face
is
Nick
not a
over there
book.
trying to
This
get
is
a
not
piece
a
of
book.
that pie for himself.
I'm just saying, I do, right? I have Caribbean relatives who are, 50% of African heritage. I can't imagine myself recommending this book to them for that reason, or at least not without a lot of caveats and like, just so you
Really?
know,
But
better
that's
just
Context,
you're
yeah.
aware there's going to be some language here that's going to be.
That's interesting to me though, because I'm assuming, for instance, let's say your family members are, just, let's say they're more or less like you. Let's imagine a mirror image of you, right? The only difference.
Okay, they're just the black.
Yeah,
version.
the only difference
They're
is
not, but go on.
no, but you know what I mean. Just in terms of like, uh, understanding of the world, so modern
Sure,
media.
but here's actually that's funny. You say so.
Oh, hold on, let me
Generation.
finish the
No,
thought.
no.
Right?
Let
Okay.
me
All
interrupt
right.
you for a second, and then see if I'm anticipating or then if I'm
Yeah,
not.
yeah,
So, for example, my relatives who are older than me,
yeah.
right? I would say, yeah, probably they would have, whether a sense of humor is the right word or like an ability to see this in context.
Yes, yes.
Say
That's
that
right. Yeah.
say the ones who are more like in their early 20s, right? So that basically my cousin's kids, right? I don't know. I don't know that they haven't
I
grown
see.
up in time. You know what I mean? Like they've
So there's a
grown up in time when
distinction.
this is more.
So, for instance, for someone older who, you
Lived and experienced this stuff.
yeah,
Maybe
you would feel more. You'd be like, oh, this is this,
I
and you
still might give them a heads up if
no,
I
no,
gave
but
them.
you wouldn't feel the need to couch it in a slightly condescending way, but you would maybe to a younger generation because they
Potentially,
like,
yes.
yeah, okay,
yeah,
that's
because of there is a separation there. I
yeah,
understand that.
yeah, no, that makes sense. But it doesn't. But I wouldn't feel the need to caveat it to the older generation because, well, I would assume they would know even better than me about these things
Absolutely.
and would have been the target of it. So they don't really
Absolutely.
need me to cushion it for them, if you see what I mean.
Right.
I can't remember how that got started now, but that tangent. Anyway, so you did find parts of it funny.
Yes. Oh yeah, yeah.
Right? Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't. Gino, obviously, you're the one who brought this to us. Is this hilarious throughout for you, or in patches, or where do you stand? Give us your review of God's Only Son.
God's other son.
Oh, sorry, God's, yes, that's it.
There you go.
Book.
God's only
Yes.
son is Jesus, Clive. That's how much of an atheist Clive is. He doesn't even know that.
I don't know the difference. Yes, I've heard of him.
Well, let me just, give my basic opinion of the book. I think it's a great extension of what Imus was doing on the radio at around this time and everything. I found lots of parts of this, hilarious. I mean, the language, of course, is an issue for a lot of people. It was an issue when I was, transferring this to digital the other day, and I was listening to it. Mom's like, "Why you got to be listening to this?" But I mean, but the ironic part of that is that we both grew up listening to this sort of stuff on his program every day. I get on with Imus's humor. I'm more of an I'm going to state right here. I'm an Imus fan, not a Stern fan. I'm an Imus fan, and I've always been that way. And I like the humor of this book. I think it's funny, and I think it's a great, especially now as sort of like a born again Christian, and somebody who attends church, weekly, and who's really an actual avid believer of, God and everything. I love, the sort of sadistic sense of humor that this book has towards those, fraudulent, evangelists who are really out there just, for their own ill-gotten gains, and that's what I like about this book is the fact that, Imus, I mean, I don't know what Imus's personal beliefs were, honestly. I don't know, his biography that well, but, he obviously, got fed up with this type of behavior going on in society and decided to fabricate this character and then by extension write this book as, a sort of parody of all that was going on at the time. So, I for one do enjoy this book. It's not a book that I admittedly visit very often because again, nonfiction guy, but I do revisit it from time to time, and I do find it to be an enjoyable read as well as an enjoyable listen.
So how did you originally? So when you were first listening to Don Imus, what was the like the was it on local radio like syndicated, or was it like how were you hearing him?
Oh, well, see, here's the thing. By the time I got to him, it was in the late 90s, early 2000s and such. And he was his radio program was essentially being shot for television
Okay.
every day for MSNBC. And so basically, it was like a filmed radio show, essentially.
Yeah.
And every morning I would wake up and mom and I, would, listen to Imus, would watch him and listen to him and everything else. And before I went off to school, I actually, interestingly enough, when I have a tape of Imus programs that I recorded while I would think I was on spring break in 2011. This was when he was on Fox Business towards the end of his career. And I'd like to digitize that tape soon, actually, because I think that there's some interesting, timely stuff of the time on there. But I've always been a fan of Imus. There's always been a part of me that's always sort of looked up to him. And, when his radio show ended rather emotionally in March of 2018, it affected a lot of us who, had been long time listeners and subsequent watchers of his program. And people have said, "Oh, well, the program is on its last legs." Once Charles left, it went off the rails. And once Deirdre came into the picture, the program became less funny and more, pointed about this and that and the other thing, and her own personal beliefs. But I think I'd like to say was consistent with with his humor and consistent with his quality of programming. And I I've always enjoyed him. And when he died, I think in 2019, I was gutted, because here was a man who was basically one of my main influences. And in what I mean, I wouldn't necessarily say Geno in the Evening was a career, but what I basically did as sort of like my pet project.
Mhm.
And I mean, again, reason why I wear the hat is in tribute to him. So, I owe a great debt to Don Imus, and I think a lot of broadcasters, even Howard Stern, even though he'd likely not admit it, I think a lot of broadcasters owe a serious debt to Don Imus because nobody did what he did. Nobody, was on the radio for that long, and was able to persevere and provide and was able to change their format, but do so seamlessly. I could safely say there will never be another Don Imus. He was a one-off, one in a million, and I'll always enjoy the work that he, Charles McCord, and Bernard McGurk did in those golden years.
Yeah,
So,
there's something that I think is like when you spend a lot of time with something like that, and this is like it's just going to seem like a weird connection to make maybe, but like I in my late high school, early university years for a long time watched Conan O'Brien religiously. I'm partly because he's Irish or of Irish extraction, right? And so that's like 5 nights a week for an hour, and he was interviewing people, and there was a lot of weird, ridiculous, over the top comedy bits and stuff. And I can remember the night that Andy Richter, who was his co-host, left. And I can remember Conan being in tears, and I can remember being in tears myself and being quite surprised that I cared this much about. But there was a sense that you'd spent an hour a night with these people 5 days a week for 6, 7 years on end. And there's a feeling that although you're not a part of this group, you don't know these people, you still feel somehow connected to them in some
Right.
meaningful way.
Here's a
Yeah.
question then, maybe my last question for this to round it up here is, I'm kind of interested if you were going to do a similar kind of takedown of televangelism or whatever it's mutated into and what it's called now, because I'm assuming this is still out there, right? Those mega
Oh, yeah.
churches still exist, and those mega churches are still filling up with people. And I wonder how do you think, how does it differ? How does the world differ, that world differ now? And for instance, I have no idea of how it's embraced the internet or social media or something like that. And what would be the differences, do you think, if you were to write a novel like this now, or what different
There is
things?
a TV series that I haven't watched, but it has John Goodman playing the part of the scion of like a sort of a modern day televangelist family, and the guy, what's his face that I like, Walter Goggins, who was in Justified and stuff like that. It's called The Righteous Gemstones, I believe, and that's what it kind of is. But it's about an entire empire, like a family run mega church evangelist thing, and it's on TV right now, and it's very apparent. I haven't seen it, but apparently it's very, very highly talked about. But it's kind of the same thing. It's very much a continuation of this idea, I think.
Have you seen that, Gino? I've not seen this show.
No, this is actually the first I've heard of it.
Yeah, same here. I've written it down, so I might check that out. So you're thinking that might be.
I feel like if you wanted to know how, like it's considered to be the contemporary parody of that kind of mercenary version of exploiting people for their beliefs or whatever. Yeah.
Right. So there we go. I think I think we got a kind of interesting discussion out of something that we responded to in very different way. I think that's interesting. I've mentioned this before on the show, but sometimes let's say you're chomping at the bit to talk about something you really, really like, and you bring it on, and then all of a sudden everyone just goes, yeah, that's good, that's good, that's good. And then there's no
there's no show. Yes.
Yeah, you never
we've
know.
done that a few times.
You never know what's gonna provoke
a good conversation.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, thank you for that, Gino.
Yeah, no, it was good. And plus as well, you made us talk about our first audiobook, which is something we haven't done before. So that's a different take on things as well. Does anyone have anything else left they want to say, or?
No, but Don Imus had a hell of a voice. It was that part was definitely a pleasure for me, just listening to the man read his own book. I like a good voice. I mean, like obviously he's a radio guy, so he's gonna have a good voice, but there's something comforting about somebody who reads well.
Any final thoughts?
Absolutely. Well, again, I really, enjoyed this book. I enjoy Imus. I've always, again, been an Imus fan, and I'm glad that, this book gave me an excuse to come on and talk about something that, honestly, I don't get a chance to talk about very often, which is Imus and Imus in the Morning. So I want to thank you, Clive, and I want to thank you, Nick, for providing me this opportunity to talk about someone who, really touched my life in, a meaningful way. And hopefully, his legacy lives on. It's sad that Don Imus and Bernard McGurk are no longer with us. It's really a shame that those two radio giants and really broadcasting giants have left this earth. But hopefully they're up there in heaven.
Isn't Don McCord gone as well?
No, Charles McCord is still alive. It's just that he's retired.
That
he's retired. I believe he's in Arkansas. I believe that's where he is, spending his days fishing and just enjoying his life, which is much deserved after, all of his years on the show. But it is sad to think that Bernard McGurk and Don Imus are gone, and, Sid Rosenberg is basically carrying the mantle now for both of them. And Rob Bartlett's still, I think, doing his occasional comedy shows, and, but the legacy will live on as long as we have YouTube, as long as we have the books like this and audio recordings and people who have saved their checks and taped the show off of TV when it was on TV. We'll always have, those great memories to look back on as far as, the real Imus fans. So I'm grateful for Imus, and I'm grateful for this opportunity to discuss them tonight.
Yeah, no, you're very welcome. There's a
Absolutely.
yeah, thanks to you too, and for bringing it to us. And yeah, always a pleasure to
Absolutely.
have you on. And let's do it again.
Yep. See you again soon, for sure.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right then. Cheery bye.
Goodbye.